Has Airbnb caused the rental crisis? If you follow the popular press, social media, political comments, talk shows, radio, and of course confirmed by taxi driver conversations, the rental crisis in Australia has been caused by Airbnb, Booking.com and the associated online travel agents. Comments that you will often hear from people is how widespread the incidents of Airbnbs are. They appear to be like rabbits, they're everywhere. But when you ask these people, how common are they in your area? The replies tend to be, there's one in my building, oh, there's one at the end of the street, or my sister has one next door. So the numbers often don't reflect the reality. But what is the reality? What are the facts regarding this? Let's look at the facts regarding rental properties in Australia and the short-term rental market. Airbnb states that only 1 to 2% of all properties in Australia are used for short-term rental purposes. But of course they'd say that. Even if the reality was 20%, some people would say Airbnb will say it's 1 to 2%. Who else is there that we can check with to see what the true figures are? If we look at the New South Wales government, the New South Wales government has commissioned reports, and they've actually come out and said 1.9% of all residential properties in New South Wales are used for short-term rental. 1.9%. Victoria had the same study, also found that theirs was 1.6% of all properties in Victoria were for short-term accommodation. The Real Estate Institute of Australia confirms those numbers anywhere between 1.6 and 1.9. Interesting thing that the Real Estate Institute of Australia also pointed out that of those 1.6 to 1.9% of properties, 80% of them are solely for the use of short-term guests. But 20% of that figure, the owners live on site. So they're the properties where you have a house and the owner is renting out the granny flat as an Airbnb, or the owner has the house sectioned off and they live in part of it and the guests live in part of it. So 20% of all of those listings are actually owners and residents. So whether or not they were doing Airbnb or not doing Airbnb, 20% of that 1.6 to 1.9% wouldn't be on the rental market anyway because the owners are living in residence. So it appears from those three sources that maybe the Airbnb figures of 1.6 to 1.9% is accurate, and that is the true figure of the number of short-term rentals in Australia. Let's look for further sources of facts upon this. The most authoritative guide for statistics in Australia is the federal government's Australian Bureau of Statistics, or the ABS. Every 5 years, the ABS conducts an extensive survey, census, across Australia. The last census was in 2021. And in 2021, all properties and individuals in Australia, adults, were surveyed along a wide variety of things. One of the findings was 30.6% of all occupied private dwellings were occupied by renters. So I'll go back. In 2021, 30.9% of all occupied dwellings were renters. Okay, so we understand that. If you went back to the survey before that, which would be 2016, you would expect a very different figure because of the increase of Airbnbs, if they're the cause of everything. But in 2016, remembering 2021 was 30.6%. In 2016, it was 30.9% of all occupied dwellings were occupied by renters. So both of them nearly identical, nearly 31%. Go back a further 5 years to 2011. In 2011, we find that 29.6% of occupied dwellings were occupied by renters. Therefore, between the 2011 and 2021 census, the percentage of renters across occupied dwellings had gone up 1%, in 10 years. And so there's more renters across the entire pool, not less renters. The facts from the ABS show that the total percentage of renters across the occupied dwellings as a percentage of all properties has actually increased, not the pool has decreased. Okay, clearly we're here to blame somebody. Let's blame somebody. Airbnb, they're only 1.6 to 1.9%. The ABS are telling us that the occupied dwellings percentage of the total housing pool has not really changed in certainly the last 5, and it's actually more renters and more rental properties in the last 10. So who can we blame? Let's go to the New South Wales government and have a look at what they've said. They've actually come out and said there are 35,000 private holiday homes unoccupied that are not being used for short-term rentals. That is, in New South Wales, 35,000 properties are sitting there and people are using them as holiday properties for a weekend, during a week, holidays for themselves, friends, family members, grandchildren, whatever. They don't rent them out, they're used for their own purposes. You can almost hear the penny dropping with politicians thinking, oh my goodness, how can we blame them and now get control of their properties? How can we compel owners to make their properties in the rental pool? Clearly, is that a society we want to live in? I'd suggest not. And people will either sell the property, have a family member move in, or construct another means of avoiding that. That's not the solution to the problem. People who have their own holiday property and go and stay there when they want, they're not the cause of the rental property, as was AirBNB not the cause. Other state and territory governments confirmed that the numbers of unoccupied properties used as holiday homes by Australian individuals in their state on percentages are similar numbers to New South Wales. So that's not unique to New South Wales, that's around the countryside. It is said when governments don't know what to do, they conduct an inquiry. Maybe, maybe not. The Queensland government conducted an inquiry headed by 3 professors, an associate professor and a research academic doctor. Their study was called A Review of the Impacts of Short-Term Rental Accommodation in Queensland, June 2023. Their study found that dwelling supply was the greatest impact on rental availability and affordability. I'll say that again. This comprehensive study, whilst it's only Queensland, they found that total dwelling supply was the problem. Population's growing, there's not enough houses. We're not building enough, we're not replacing enough. There are not enough dwellings in supply. That's the problem. And the comprehensive study came out and said that short-term rentals have got a very limited impact on rental affordability. What they found was it was the dwelling stocks that were the significant contributor to explaining rental price increases. Obviously, if we haven't got enough properties, they're not building enough, the population's growing, etc., rental prices are going up, availability is going down. So if it's not, the other interesting thing with that was that what they found was around Queensland, even in areas that don't have Airbnb or have very low numbers of Airbnb, that rental availability was still a problem. So if Airbnb was the problem, why is it you're in an area and there are very few Airbnbs, yet rents are tight and incredibly unavailable and rental prices have gone up? That doesn't make sense. Could it be that the problem actually lies elsewhere, that the cause of the problem lies elsewhere? Might the real cause of the dwelling supply shortage, as identified in the Queensland study, be tighter and tighter rental laws discouraging Australians from purchasing rental properties? If you make the rental conditions harder and harder for landlords, they choose to do something else. They buy commercial property, they buy shares, they buy crypto, they buy a holiday home for their own purposes, they buy an Airbnb, they buy something else. Well, they don't buy anything. But if you restrict supply by making it more and more difficult, it shouldn't be then a surprise that we have a restriction on some rental numbers coming in. Also, may it be that with the rental laws becoming even harsher on landlords and all sorts of items being brought in, that landlords at some stage are saying, that's it, I've had enough, I'm not doing it anymore. Could it also be a cause or a reason the state and local government zoning laws? Developers who say, we've got a broad acre site, we want to put in these houses, it's got approval, and what they're finding is the study can, not just the study, that the approval before they put a shovel in the ground can take anywhere from 3, 4, up to 10 years. Now, you can't build enough houses to get supply if you haven't gone back the previous step and have zoning allowed to be able to put them up. Now, I'm conscious that we're not knocking down koala habitats and everything else, but clearly if something takes 3 to 10 years to give approval to, that's ridiculous. Increased divorce rate since COVID is also an issue in the fact that instead of having one household now, there's two across the property. Couples divorce, the divorce rate's up slightly, so therefore instead of having one household, they're in two. Also, may this be a problem in the fact that our yearly intake of immigrants to Australia, so that's people coming to live both for permanent residency and also a student study. Student studies are counted in the immigrant numbers. Our immigrant intake this year is 500,000 people. So we've gone from COVID of having zero intake to now we've 500,000 people. Is Airbnb's 1.6 to 1.9% the cause of a housing shortage? Or is zoning, harsh rental landlord laws, an intake of 500,000 people a year when we're building less than 200,000 properties? The shortfall's got to happen somewhere. And unfortunately it's happening and people are being squeezed. Okay, so what's the answer? It's a terrible situation when Australians don't have access to affordable rent. Absolutely. But rather than running around putting up rates, putting up charges and fees on Airbnb properties, rather than trying to sanction landlords, rather than do whatever, when we look at the real causes, what do we say? What's the answer? What can be done to fix it? Clearly, if there was an easy, quick answer, the politicians would have seized on it and that would have already been done. The real answer to the problem isn't an orphan. It's got many, many fathers, many parents. Inaction, ill-advised decisions from both the federal, state and local governments appear to be the main culprits. It's funny, with all of the hype, all of the media input, everything else we've heard, we've not heard politicians saying, listen, we have a housing crisis and we've done a study and we recognise that it is an availability issue and it's because of our zoning laws, it's because of our imposts on landlords, it's because of increased fees, it's because. They're not. Best to blame others rather than your own omissions, weaknesses and errors. Clearly, the facts show that government policies and inaction are the basic problem for this. Most people know that anyway, but don't get caught by the headlines that blame short-term rentals as the problem. They're not the problem. The problem is government policies, government inaction, and resources being spent elsewhere. At the moment, increased rates and other sanctions they're putting on are all sound grabs for politicians to show that they're acting on it and they're trying to do something to help Australians. The real solutions aren't going to happen immediately. This will take a number of years. But sitting and blaming one group of people, whether they be people who own a second property, whether Airbnb or whether they're something else, is not the truth, and it's also not the answer to the problem. What they need to do is to change how they can grow the entire rental pool of available dwellings so every Australian has access to a property over their head. Thanks.